Ben Clark had a clear appreciation for Colton's young population. In a country where small towns often lost their youth to the allure of big cities, Colton had managed to not only retain its younger residents but attract more. The town had a vibrant, youthful pulse at its core. However, there were aspects of Colton that Ben didn't quite like. The town leaned heavily into boutiques and craft shops, giving it a transient, almost touristy feel. It wasn't quite the quiet, secluded place he was seeking. While the town had its charm, with new apartment complexes and renovated buildings, it also had a slight air of a town trying to be something it wasn't. Ben was looking for a quiet retreat, not a place that seemed caught between growth and its small-town roots. He found the pastry shop at the center of the town square and parked in front. As he stepped out of his car, he noticed the young crowd on the sidewalks. Colton reminded him of a small college town, minus the college. Most of the people he saw were between 18 and 23, making him feel like an older graduate lingering around a campus, hoping for a teaching position. Inside, a redhead behind the counter packed pastries for a young couple. When they left, another pair of young adults walked in. Ben approached the counter and asked for Blake Rombert. The redhead turned and called, "Blake. A guy here to see you." Ben chuckled, and a well-built man emerged from behind the curtain, initially frowning but quickly switching to a smile when he saw Ben. "Hey, buddy, you made it." Blake greeted him warmly. "A couple wrong turns, but here I am," Ben replied with a grin. "Good, good. Have you found a place to stay yet?" "Just got here." "Any recommendations?" Ben asked. "Well, I'd offer you a spot at my place, but it's a bit cramped since Lily moved in," Blake explained. "The Meadows is nice and new. You passed it on your way in. Want me to call?" "That works," Ben said. A room was secured, and Ben agreed to meet Blake at 5:15 for a tour of the town. Blake chuckled. "Not much to see, but you said you wanted small. You'll find that here. We've got some good places to eat, bars, and nice shops. There's a creek about 5 miles outside of town. You mentioned you like to fish. And honestly, I think we could use a CPA here." "I like the sound of my own practice, something more laid back," Ben said. "Laid back's our thing," Blake replied, "but we know how to party too." Ben smiled. "Anyone into hunting?" "Deer season, but that's about it," Blake said with a shrug. "Mostly, it's just campfires and beer." The Meadows was a new, reasonably priced spot, so Ben checked in, freshened up, and rushed back to the pastry shop to meet Blake. Outside, Blake was talking to 2 other men. After brief introductions, the group made small talk about sports, with the newcomers mentioning that Ben looked like he kept in shape and that their softball team could use a big guy for first base. "They're always looking for a jock," Blake said, grinning as he climbed into his SUV. "Everyone's into sports here, but it's a nightmare getting them to show up for practice." "I'm in if I move here," Ben replied. "So, what's holding you back?" Blake asked as he started the engine. "It's a big change, and I want to be sure this is what I want." Blake drove them around the town, showing him the parts that hadn't been gentrified. "This is the other side of town," he said. "Mostly older folks live out here. Most have moved on, which suits me fine. I just wanted to show you, so you don't waste time exploring." The area was a far cry from the trendy side of town. The houses were modest, mostly clapboard, grouped together in clusters, with vacant lots scattered between them. The road soon ended, and Blake made a quick turn onto another quiet street. "What's out this way?" Ben asked. "Nothing," Blake answered. "Seriously?" "The road ends after about 15 miles. One way leads to Forest, the other takes you to Humphrey, a town that's pretty much like Colton was 5 years ago, on the decline." "All the young people left?" Ben asked. "Moved," Blake replied, completing the turn and heading back toward Colton. "There used to be some mining off to the left, beyond the forest, but that stopped long before I got here. A little farming, mostly vegetables and soybeans, was all that was left." Ben couldn't help but ask, but why are there so many college-aged people in Colton? Blake shrugged. Like I told you when we first met in that bar, it just sort of happened. Some came, then more followed, and soon enough, we started taking over. We pushed out the older folks, and now we run the place for ourselves. Blake and Ben had first spoken at a bar in the city, a spot popular with young professionals who like to think of themselves as jocks with jobs. Although it was technically a sports bar, the crowd was mainly made up of white-collar workers just beginning their careers. Blake had been chatting with another guy about a team when Ben joined in, and the two hit it off. When Ben learned that Blake was from out of town, it allowed him to open up more than usual. He found himself sharing his thoughts about leaving the hustle of city life behind and starting fresh in a small town with a low-pressure atmosphere. That was when Blake told him about Colton. The rest of the tour was brief. Most of the shops closed early, and the nicer residential area was small, mostly consisting of single-family homes and 2 renovated apartment buildings that had the feel of student housing, likely because everyone around seemed to be in their 20s. Though the stores shut down early, the bars opened early to cater to the youthful crowd. One, called Darts, had a giant neon dartboard as its sign and was already packed. There are a few apartments back there, Blake said, pointing. I know because Lily and I live in one. Want to grab a drink? I think I'll pass tonight, Ben replied. Long drive. But I'll take you up on it tomorrow if you and Lily are free. Of course, Blake said. We'll show you how we party in Colton tomorrow. Sounds good. Does Colton have a gym? Not really, Blake answered. There's a fitness club, but it's women only. You work out? Yeah. You look like it, Blake chuckled. The guys here don't really go for that, too much like manual labor. Well, I've got free weights and a couple of benches, Ben said. I can set them up in a spare room if I get an apartment. Pump that iron, dude, Blake grinned. The next day, Ben explored the town on his own. Something about it intrigued him, but he couldn't figure out exactly what it was. The fact that so many young people, who were clearly interested in trends, had chosen to settle in Colton didn't make sense to him. Blake's explanation for the appeal of the town to people in their early 20s felt weak. There didn't seem to be anything here for them other than a bunch of others their own age, something they could find anywhere. How many people his age, like him, were trying to escape the pressures of city life? Most people his age were busy starting careers, not avoiding them. Colton was too small to have a newspaper, even a weekly shopper, and way too small for a radio or TV station. There wasn't any professional source of information about the town. Ben drove north out of town, hoping to get insight from the older residents who might remember when the youth invasion had begun. He pulled into a convenience store with a gas station and noticed an elderly woman coming out. She gave him a disgusted look as she passed. Inside, the clerk appeared to be in his 70s, as were the 2 men browsing the aisles. They all gave Ben the same disapproving look when they noticed him. He grabbed a beer from the cooler and walked to the counter. I'm new in town, Ben said, trying to make conversation. Is that right? The clerk replied indifferently. Is there anyone around who can tell me a little about the area, about Colton? The clerk's tone changed when he heard that and called out loudly to the other customers, Man wants to know about Colton. I'll bet he does, one of the older men muttered, turning away. No one else said anything. Who should I talk to? Ben asked, feeling awkward. The clerk shook his head. No suggestions. Ben pressed on. Why not? Why don't you just head back to the other side of town and leave us alone, the clerk said. Ben stood there for a moment, contemplating, but decided not to push it. As he was leaving, one of the men called out, Tell him to go talk to William, he's the one who started all this. We don't know that, the clerk muttered. Ben turned back and walked down an aisle, heading toward the speaker. Who's William? He asked. I shouldn't have said anything, the first man replied. I don't know why not, the second man said, approaching with a 6-pack and a couple of bags of chips. There's nothing illegal about talking. The first man just moped. Who's William? Ben repeated. A crazy old hermit, the second man explained. They say he discovered something. What? Ben asked, intrigued. Nobody knows, the second man said. Except maybe the kids. You don't know that, Arnold, the clerk warned. The second man shrugged. That's what they say. They don't know either, the clerk said curtly. Maybe. Maybe not, Arnold replied, turning back to Ben. Go talk to him and see for yourself. I, for one, would like to know what's really going on around here. William hasn't even been to town much, the clerk chimed in. It's just gossip, people making up stories to explain things. William doesn't know anything. Maybe. Maybe not, Arnold said again. Maybe this new guy can get to the bottom of it. I sure as hell want to know. Ben asked, why? What's the mystery? What's going on? If I knew, I'd tell ya, Arnold responded. And you don't know anything, the clerk added. Just like William doesn't know anything. Arnold shrugged and walked past Ben, heading to the counter with his items. Where do I find William? Ben asked. Arnold glanced at the clerk, then at the third old man. No one said anything. He might shoot you, the third man warned. William doesn't like visitors. Thanks for the heads up, Ben replied. Now, where can I find him? The man hesitated before answering, keep going. There's a dirt road about 4 miles up. It cuts through the woods. When it comes out the other side, go another 4 or 5 miles. 6 at least, Arnold interrupted. 4 or 5 miles, the man corrected firmly. Watch for another dirt road to your left. It's easy to miss because no one uses it. Keep going until you see a shack. That's William's. Thanks, Ben said. Should I tell him you sent me? The man chuckled. Better not. In fact, Arnold added, you didn't stop here, you didn't see us, and you didn't talk to us. Got it, Ben replied. He bought a 6-pack of the same beer Arnold had, a couple of bags of snacks, and some coffee. The road was a challenge. The first part, through the hilly forest, was so in use that small saplings were growing down the center. The turnoff was even worse, covered in short weeds, nearly blending with the surrounding field. When Ben finally reached the shack, he realized the old man's description was spot on. The structure was small, about 20 by 20 feet, and appeared to be a single room. Ben honked his horn as soon as he saw it, continuing to honk several times as he pulled up to the rough wood building. He waited in his car, honking a few more times, figuring it was better not to surprise someone who might shoot him. When no one appeared, he got out, carrying the beer, coffee, and snacks. He knocked on the door, but got no answer. After a moment, he decided to walk around the building. The back of the house suggested William was self-sufficient. A large pen held 2 goats, a fenced-in garden kept critters out, and an outhouse stood to the side with its door wide open. He returned to the front door and knocked again. Still no response. He put the items down and returned to his car, waiting a few more minutes before leaving. I talked to some of my friends, and they want to meet you, Blake said. They think they could use a bookkeeper around here. Ben had grabbed a double burger, fries, and a giant Coke from a local drive-thru, a place run by a brother and sister, and checked out a few stores on the town square. He then stopped by Blake's pastry shop. Mostly, though, I think they just need a good first baseman, Blake added with a laugh. I'm up for that, too, if I stay, Ben said. Blake raised an eyebrow. You don't like Colton? I do, Ben replied. It's perfect. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something I'm missing. Like what? Blake asked, curious. I'm not sure, Ben admitted. He was tempted to ask about the strange college town vibe in a place without a college, or any school for that matter. But he figured he'd just hear the same answer from Blake. Some kids came, attracted others, and before long, the town was full of them. Ben kept what he knew about William to himself, both because the old-timers at the convenience store had asked him to stay quiet and because he figured Blake would just dismiss any supposed wisdom William might have. "Why don't you come back after we close, like last night?" Blake suggested. "I'll take you home, we'll have dinner with Lily and me, and then hit up a few clubs. Colton gets pretty lively at night. I know you said you wanted quiet, but here you can have both, a quiet life, plus a chance to party when you want." "Sounds good," Ben agreed. "I'll see you then." Feeling a bit foolish, Ben headed south toward his motel, but once he was out of sight of the pastry shop, he turned right, then right again, and took a parallel road to the main street. It didn't really matter, but he didn't want Blake seeing him heading north. He drove back to the same convenience store, where the same clerk was working. Ben picked up a box of salt and a bag of sugar and went to the counter. As he was checking out, an elderly woman walked in, paused when she saw him, and then headed toward the back of the store. "Talk to William?" the clerk asked as he rang up Ben's items. "Nobody home," Ben replied. The clerk nodded, bagging the items. "Bribe?" Ben chuckled. "I guess you could call it that." "Probably more than William's seen in a while," the clerk commented. "What can you tell me about him?" Ben asked. The clerk thought for a moment. "He's not from around here. Moved here about 25 years ago, I think. Built that shack himself. He hunts for food, tried some mining in the creek but didn't find anything. I've heard he sleeps under trees if he's too far from home when night comes, but that's just hearsay." Ben waited for more, but the clerk just looked at him. Ben paid and asked, "No visitors?" "Wouldn't really know," the clerk answered. "Out there, anybody could come and go, and who's to know?" Ben nodded. "The other guy said there's a rumor William found something." The clerk scoffed. "Oh, he doesn't know anything. You know how people are. When they don't know something, they make up stories to make it interesting. Some people call it gossip. Some call it nonsense." The way he said it made it clear what he thought of it. The woman at the counter stepped up with her items, keeping her distance from Ben. "Well, thanks," Ben said and left the store. He drove back to the shack, honking his horn the whole way. William still hadn't returned, and his initial gifts were still by the door. Ben added the salt and sugar to the pile. He sat in his car for a half hour, honking a few more times, then backed onto the path that served as a road. A man stepped out from the bushes about 40 feet behind him and walked toward the car, carrying a rifle across his chest and wearing a pistol in a Western-style holster. Ben cut the engine and waited, watching the man in his side mirror. "Hello, William," Ben thought. The old man moved slowly but confidently, approaching the car. "What do you want?" William asked. "If you're William, I want to talk to you for a minute," Ben said. "I'm new in town and I'm trying to learn more about the area." At the mention of new in town, William raised his rifle. "Don't go to town," William warned. "Who sent you?" "No one," Ben answered, knowing this would be the hard part, starting with a small lie to gain William's trust. "I just heard about you and thought you'd be interesting to talk to." "You expect me to believe that?" William spat. Ben smiled. "It's pretty much the truth." "What part isn't?" "It's true, but not the whole story," Ben admitted. "I'm trying to figure out something that doesn't make sense. I thought you might know the answer." "What would that be?" "Mind if I get out of the car?" Ben asked. William stepped back, the rifle still aimed directly at Ben. "Come on out," William said. "Slow." Ben complied, making sure to move in a way that seemed non-threatening. He was taller and much younger than the old man, but he kept his movements calm. "You seem a little defensive," Ben observed. "I've got my reasons," William replied. "Okay," Ben said. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Try one, William said gruffly. Ben paused, thinking carefully. It's hard to put into words, but like I said, I'm new to Colton. I might move here, but there's something. I don't know. I can't put my finger on it, but something about this place feels off. The old man smiled a crooked grin. Do tell. What is it? You tell me, William challenged. Ben sighed. That's the thing, I don't know. It's nice enough, but it feels strange for a small town in the middle of nowhere to have so many young people. Lots of pretty girls, William said with a nod. Yeah, Ben agreed. And college guys, but no college. William nodded again, as if that explained everything. I suppose it could happen, but it doesn't feel right, Ben said. William nodded once more. And I just realized this, Ben continued. But I don't think I've seen anyone who's tall. You're tall, William replied. Usually, Ben muttered, more to himself than to the hermit, in a group of guys, there's always someone around 6'2", maybe even taller. But every guy I've seen here seems to be about 5'8" or 5'9". I've seen a lot of guys around town, and none of them are tall. They're all younger, but no tall guys. How about that? William replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. What do you mean? Ben asked, confused. William stared at him for a long moment. Best get back in your car. A stranger could get shot out here. Best not come back. Just tell me what you know, Ben persisted. I don't want no trouble, William said. I wouldn't tell anyone, Ben assured him. William spat on the ground. You better get out of here now. And don't come back. Ben felt the urge to push further, but the increasing irritation in William's voice made him reconsider. I'm good at keeping secrets, Ben said, turning toward his car and opening the door. So am I, William muttered. Lily, a lively blonde with a bright smile, took the bottle of wine Ben brought and thanked him before disappearing with it. Ben sat in the living room with Blake, and after a moment, Lily joined them. She was a town enthusiast, painting Colton as the perfect place for anyone. She talked about the fun atmosphere, how people in their age group held most of the local offices, and how they tailored the town's rules to fit their lifestyles. She also mentioned the reasonable cost of living. You really should move here, she urged. You'll love it. Dinner was simple but delicious, and Lily was a fantastic cook. Afterward, the guys cleaned up while she went to change. Colton came alive at night. Despite its small size, nearly every resident, minus the older folks, was out and about, strolling the streets, cruising the town square, or hitting the clubs tucked on the side streets. Blake gave Ben the rundown on the local bars. Rock, country, blues, folk, more rock. There's even a jazz club, if you're into that, but it's not really party central. We went once, Lily added. Colton's too small to have a drunk driving problem, Blake joked. We have a drunk walking problem. You can hop from bar to bar without needing a car. Blake and Lily seemed to know everyone, and one after another, couples came up to say hello and introduce themselves to Ben. Now that he had noticed it and put his observations into words, Ben realized there truly were no tall people in Colton. It wasn't a town of little people, but looking out over a crowd of dancers, he became aware that he was, indeed, looking over them. The difference wasn't enough to make him feel self-conscious, but once he noticed, it was unmistakable. Blake and Lily kept him busy, introducing him to a mix of attractive single girls from their wide circle of friends. He danced with at least half a dozen women throughout the night and especially hit it off with an athletic brunette with a lively laugh. As he observed, another realization dawned on him: there weren't many jocks in Colton. Ben had always worked out with free weights and machines, though never obsessively. But the guys in Colton, with a few exceptions, didn't seem athletic. It wasn't that they were out of shape, but the typical college-age jocks were noticeably absent. Coltonians weren't particularly nerdy either. It wasn't a town of bookworms, though that crowd did exist, but rather a community of average guys in unusually high numbers. The girls, however, seemed to be in better shape overall, which Ben guessed could be attributed to the fitness center Blake had mentioned. "Don't let all the partying overwhelm you," Lily said with a bright smile at one point. "Blake said you liked it quiet, and there's no law saying you have to hit the clubs every night." "I'll propose that at the next town meeting," Blake joked. "I'm not against partying," Ben said. "What I meant was, I'm looking for somewhere less stressful. I like to have fun, I just want to escape the pressure of city life and the grind of my job." "Amen," Blake agreed. "There's just so much coming at you in the city," Ben continued. "Dinners with people just because they might be able to help your career. You know how it is. Everyone's obsessed with the next big thing or the latest investment opportunity. One guy in my office sells high-end luxury cars, at least he thinks they're high-end. They're actually very cheap. It never ends." "I know exactly what you mean," Lily nodded. "I like money as much as anyone," Ben said, "but I can't picture myself cooking the books for a big corporation for the rest of my life. There's more to life." "Like having a good time," Blake said, raising his glass. They all toasted. The grand tour of Colton's nightlife almost made Ben reconsider moving there. It had been fun, but also a bit juvenile. Some of the people he met were his age, part of the early wave of Colton's youth influx, but most were 4 or 5 years younger. That made him feel old, not old, exactly, but mature. Mature was a feeling he hadn't experienced much on the job, where everyone was older than he was. But just a few years' difference between him and the typical Colton resident made him acutely aware of it. He liked to party, but partying for him was a weekend escape. In Colton, dancing, drinking, talking, and listening to music seemed to be the core of life. It was like college, without the classes. Although Blake and Lily had introduced him to a few married couples during their bar hopping night, the vast majority of people were single. That wasn't necessarily a bad thing, having so many attractive women to date was certainly appealing. But Ben couldn't help but wonder about the long-term stability of a town where the majority of people were young and single. Still, no place was perfect, and Colton had a lot going for it. The youthful energy brought by the 18 to 25 crowd gave the town a lively, vibrant atmosphere, all wrapped up in an easygoing vibe. And while it might not have been a completely honorable thought, the fact that everyone was young made the town even more attractive, not just in the sense of wanting to visit, but in a physical sense too. People were healthy, lively, and good-looking, no wrinkles, no bald spots, no beer bellies, and no limps to be seen, unless you went north of town. In other towns, large or small, you often found a mix of groups divided by race, age, economics, education, and more. But Colton was different. It was homogeneous. All the stores catered to his age group, and Ben felt an instant connection with the shop owners and workers. Every service business seemed designed for people in his demographic, and even the informal local government was made up of people like him. Hell, if he got pulled over for speeding, the cop would be in his 20s and would understand an occasional youthful lead foot. But despite all that, something felt off. There were cracks in the town's surface, starting with the very reasons for Colton's existence. He knew why he was drawn to the place, but the reasons for everyone else's presence didn't seem entirely convincing. Well, they did, but Ben found the explanation lacking. He had learned about Colton in a casual conversation with a stranger at a bar, certainly not the kind of thing that could populate a town, even a small one. Sure, some young people probably heard about it and told their friends, but how many friends would they have to convince to fill a whole town? How many would say, "Cool. A tiny town in the middle of nowhere. Exactly what I was looking for?" Not many. After weighing the pros and cons, Ben had a pretty clear picture. Despite a few oddities, Colton seemed like a nice place to live. "Fan-freaking-tastic!" Blake exclaimed. "I knew you'd like it, and you're going to fit right in. When are you moving?" "I want to check out some storefronts, find an apartment, and I'll need to give my firm 2 weeks' notice," Ben replied. "Sure," Blake said. Anything I can do to help? I know some guys with trucks who can help you move. We don't have a rental place in town, but if you buy them a beer and cover their gas, they'll help you out as a favor to me. Thanks. I'll let you know. And Lauren's our real estate go-to, Blake added. I'll introduce you. I know there's a little office just around the corner that's empty. Lauren turned out to be around 19, and her blonde receptionist was about the same age. Both women wore jeans, polo shirts, and sneakers, and knew every building in town. Lauren showed Ben 5 different spaces, all just off the town square, within walking distance of each other. Next up was finding an apartment, which was just as easy. Blake knew that his complex had at least one 2-bedroom available, so Ben rode with him to the leasing office. The manager, who looked about 24, showed Ben both upstairs and downstairs units. Ben chose the downstairs one because it would be easier to move his things in. It wasn't buyer's remorse exactly, but more of the natural nervousness that came with a major life change. He had signed the lease for the most affordable unit, thanked Lauren when she offered to handle the occupational license paperwork, set up utilities, and rent the basic office furniture. Giving his 2 weeks' notice had been a nerve-wracking experience. The CPA firm wasn't thrilled about him leaving, especially with current accounts he would be handing off, and it was clear that no one bought his story about wanting to escape the city grind for a quieter life. Packing wasn't fun, but since he was moving everything himself rather than hiring movers, he didn't bother with double-boxing anything. The second half of the drive would be on rough, 2-lane country roads, but as long as he avoided the potholes, he figured it wouldn't be a problem. The they in his journey were Ben and the 2 guys Blake had roped into helping him. Each had a pickup, but because of Ben's furniture, they had to make the 5-hour round trip twice. He covered their gas, food, and gave them enough cash to make it worth their while. Loading and unloading twice, followed by 10 hours on the road, made for a long, exhausting day. By the time he got back, he showered, lay down on his mattress, still not assembled, and fell asleep. His first week in Colton was draining. Setting up both the apartment and his new office took far more time than he expected. There were constant small details he kept forgetting, and everything seemed to require his attention. Blake and Lily invited him over for dinner twice, and he found a decent restaurant just a block from his office. Blake brought guys by twice a day to introduce Ben to them, making him feel like he was auditioning. In a way, he was, since all of them could potentially become clients for his new bookkeeping business. The constant judging started to take its toll, although Blake always reassured him afterward that the guys liked him. If they turned into clients, the effort would be worth it. It wasn't until his 10th day in town that Ben decided he needed a break. He drove north and stopped by the convenience store. An older woman, probably in her 60s, was behind the counter. When Ben asked about the regular clerk, she curtly informed him that it was his day off. He bought some canned goods but skipped the beer, remembering how it had sat outside William's door all day, getting warm. Following his usual honking routine, he was relieved when William came outside. "I told you not to come back," the old man grumbled. "I moved to Colton," Ben replied, handing him the bag of groceries. William took the bag without a glance inside and shook his head. "Why don't young people ever listen?" "Did you listen when you were young?" Ben asked. William paused, thinking, before breaking into a small smile. "Hell, no," he admitted. William took the bag inside, and Ben followed him into the shack. The hermit moved toward a chair, and Ben quickly surveyed the place. It was sparse, crude handmade furniture, a torn, old couch, and a coffee table held up by a stick and duct tape. A cracked countertop, likely salvaged from somewhere, rested on a pile of boxes. The mismatched plates, glasses, and flatware gave the place a haphazard feel. William placed the bag by the chair and sat down, pointing to the couch. "Sit," he muttered. Ben sat. "I appreciate you taking the time." "You've been decent to me," William said. "You don't listen to me, of course." His smile returned. "And I know you're gonna get me into a lot of trouble. But it's only right I invite you in." Ben nodded. I don't mean to get you into trouble. Nobody ever does, William grumbled. I figured you'd come back about the same thing. Yes, Ben agreed. William chewed on some non-existent cud, and Ben waited. When you first came, William said, I thought the boys from town sent you. They check up on me from time to time. Aha, Ben encouraged. I had this goat, see, William said. Named him Billy. Everybody does. Had a pen out back. Made a leash and took ol' Billy for walks. He wasn't much of a walker, but he was company. Just then, the sound of an SUV pulling up interrupted their conversation. They exchanged glances, and William's eyebrows bounced up and down with a sigh. Come on in, William muttered in response to the knock on the door. He's harmless most of the time, Blake said with a grin. Ben and Blake were sharing lunch in Ben's new office. Lily had dropped it off, leaving with a smile. She gets on these health food kicks every now and then, Blake explained, so I end up eating a lot of salads and drinking water for a week or two. Then she gets bored with it, and I go back to normal food. It actually tastes pretty good. Try it. Ben tried it and agreed it was good. He watched his diet because he believed in taking care of his body, so he was accustomed to eating salads, drinking spring water, and consuming organic foods. He seems like a nice old guy, Ben said. Most of the time, Blake replied. But sometimes he starts acting like he owns the whole damn land. He thinks the forest and all the scrubland belong to him. He once put a guy in the hospital, shot him in the leg. William? He struck me as more talk than action, Ben said. Oh, no, he'll use that rifle of his if he feels like it, Blake said. He's got a history. We know he shot at a couple of people back when Colton was still a sleepy little town. You haven't met Marty and Chelsea, but they grew some pot in the forest, and he shot at them twice. Shot a knapsack. They were wearing it? No, it was on the ground. But still, he's a little crazy. And yeah, he shot that guy in the leg. He's definitely not harmless. Blake turned back to his food, and Ben followed suit. Carl and Jimmy went a bit overboard ordering you back to town, Blake said. They're still learning the ropes. Carl's only been chief of police for a few months. It was none of his business if I wanted to talk to William, Ben muttered. You're right, Blake agreed. Ben took a sip of the crystal-clear spring water. Lily had brought a large bottle and 2 glasses, claiming it was untouched by processing plants or commercial machinery. Blake had laughed, and Lily had playfully punched him on the shoulder. He was telling me some interesting things, Ben said. Oh, yeah? Like what? He mentioned this billy goat he had. Blake groaned. Oh, that old story. It's just a bunch of nonsense. He's a crazy old man. You've heard the story? Ben asked, bluffing his way through. Sure, Blake replied, but didn't offer anything more. You don't believe it? Did it seem realistic to you? Ben just shrugged. Maybe one of the old-timers at the convenience store could fill him in. Listen, Blake said, why don't you come over and we'll grab dinner, something a bit more substantial than this, and catch some live music. This is pretty good, Ben replied. And I'm not just saying that to be polite. He figured Blake was more into meat and potatoes. But I'm pretty wiped. I think I'll call it an early night. Dinner, Blake insisted, as a favor to me. Ben raised an eyebrow. Blake shrugged. It's a setup. Lily invited one of her girlfriends over, and she thinks you two will hit it off. You met her at Callow's, remember? Nice brunette, runs the classes at the fitness center. No pressure, man. Just come, eat, and if you want, you can leave afterward, but I sort of promised Lily I'd talk you into it. I do remember her, Ben said, nodding. Dinner sounds good, and we can go for a drink afterward, but I still need to keep it an early night. Not a problem, Blake said. Listen, I'll take mine back to the shop, he added, picking up his plate and glass. Don't worry about this, he gestured to Ben's plate and glass, the salad and jug of water. You can drop it off tomorrow. I'll bring it tonight, Ben said. Good enough, Blake replied. The dinner went well. Barbara was the girl Ben remembered from his first night out with Blake and Lily, and they hit it off immediately. It helped that she was upfront and laughed about the dinner being a setup. They stopped for a drink at the jazz club, the only night spot in town that wasn't packed. Lily insisted they head back to the apartment for a nightcap. After that, Ben can get his beauty sleep. Ben shifted in his sleep, turning onto his side to avoid crushing his chest. Chest? Was that right? He shifted again, struggling to stay awake enough to pay attention. Forget it. He drifted back to sleep. How are you doing, buddy? Ben heard the voice. A hand shook his shoulder. Come on. Time to wake up. That voice sounded familiar. Up and at M. You slept all night. Another shake of his shoulder. Hey, wake up, Ben. The voice was definitely talking to him. I know you're groggy, but you need to try to sit up. Open your eyes. Ben opened his eyes. There was Blake, grinning like crazy, his face close to his. There you are. Blake said. I've got some things to tell you, but you need to wake up. You're gonna be groggy and sore for a while, but try your best. Do you understand me? Blake? Ben mumbled. Very good. That's our girl, Blake laughed. I'm gonna help you sit up. Work with me. Ben felt an arm wrap around his waist. He was lifted a few inches, and the arm slid higher, closer to his shoulders. Work with me, Blake grunted, and Ben felt himself being pulled into a sitting position. There was a flurry of movement as Blake tried to hold him up while stuffing pillows behind him at the same time. Victory! Blake cheered. Now, let's get you talking. How do you feel? Sore, Ben muttered. Sleepy. Can't think. Not a problem, Blake said. That's how it works. Now listen carefully. You're gonna be groggy for a couple of weeks. Groggy, sore, and confused. But everything's okay. Remember that everything's okay. Got it? Sure, Ben said, his voice heavy. Very sore. I know, Blake replied. But you've slept a long time, so you don't need any more sleep. Try to stay awake. Ben nodded weakly. Okay, Blake said. Now, I'm gonna call you Hannah instead of Ben. Okay? Why? It works better. Trust me, Blake said. Ben closed his eyes again. No, Blake said, shaking his shoulder. Stay awake. Okay. Good. You've been through something wild, and it's gonna take a while to recover. There's nothing to be afraid of. Everything's fine. It'll just take time. Understand so far? Hurt? Accident? Ben asked, starting to feel his body come to life. No, nothing like that, Blake said with a smile. Just something you ate. It'll take a while to fully recover, that's all. Remember the new name I gave you? Do you remember what it was? Ben thought for a moment but couldn't recall. Hannah, Blake said. Remember now? I remember now, Ben repeated. Good. I've got some things to tell you, but they're kind of complicated, so we'll wait a few days, okay? Okay. Lily's at the shop today, so I'm here to watch over you and make sure you're okay, Blake said. Scott and Chris are, do you remember them? Move, Ben said, groggily. Very good. They helped you move, Blake said. They came by a while ago, and they're very happy with how you turned out. Ben was confused by that. Anyway, Blake continued, this whole thing works at its own pace, and we're just here to make it easier for you. Lily, Barbara, and the guys are all looking out for you, so you don't have to worry about a thing. Business? My business, Ben mumbled. Apartment. Exactly what I mean, Blake said. We've already got you a couple of clients, and they're happy to wait until you're fully recovered and can hit the ground running. Don't worry about the apartment either. I'll cover the rent for next month, and you can stay here as long as you need to. Everything's set up. Thank you, Ben replied. Not a problem, buddy, Blake said. You've been asleep for a long time. I'll bet you're starving. Ben hadn't realized how hungry he was, but it was true. Starving, he admitted. Blake laughed. I bet you are. Lily made you some soup, health soup, just like yesterday's lunch. Remember that? Yes. Good salad. Oh, yeah. And some fresh spring water to go with it. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Okay. The next day, Ben moved on to more substantial food, though he was still groggy and wanted to sleep a lot. Lily helped him to the bathroom, and he noticed that his body had changed. He had a small nub and 2 bumps like marbles, and she helped him sit, which was strange since he had never had to sit down before for that. Barbara came to visit, and Ben was happy to recognize her. She kissed him on the cheek and patted his arm. A few of the guys came by, and he thought he recognized a couple from when Blake had introduced them at his new office. They did a lot of grinning but didn't say much beyond wishing him a speedy recovery. On the 6th day, Ben could walk around his room, though Blake or Lily always kept an arm around him to prevent him from losing his balance. He was starting to understand that his body had changed. He was much smaller than before, but his mind was still too foggy to question the how or why of it. His memory was slowly coming back. He remembered the city, his job at the accounting firm, his move to Colton, and meeting new people, but he had no recollection of the accident. When he asked Blake about it, Blake confirmed it was something he'd eaten, which Ben now vaguely recalled hearing. That was the answer, it was something he'd eaten. At the end of the 2nd week, instead of a clean nightgown, Lily brought him a bra and panties. She helped him with the bra because he was awkward and still sore. Reaching behind him was difficult. She also brought a skirt, blouse, and a pair of flats. With her help, Ben walked around the apartment, then sat in the living room to watch TV with her. They had a satellite dish, so there were plenty of channels to choose from, though Ben couldn't decide what to watch. He let Lily choose for them, and he fell asleep during the program. By the 3rd week, something didn't feel right. What kind of accident could make him shrink so much? Why did he have chests, and why was the thing between his legs just a nub? He wasn't distressed about the questions, he just felt like he should know the answers. Remember when I told you it was something you ate? Blake asked. Yeah, I remember. Well, that was true, Blake said. Something you ate, combined with something you drank. Oh, so it was a combination, Ben thought. Lily's lunch? Yep. But you ate but didn't drink. It takes both, Blake explained. You remember William? Sure. Well, William found a little spring out in the woods. Not even fair to call it a spring, just a little water leaking out of the ground, making a tiny puddle about an inch deep. The water seemed fine, clear and no smell, but he made his goat drink it first. He told me about the goat. He named it Billy, Ben said. Right. What else did he tell you about the goat? Nothing, Ben said. Really? I thought he told you more. That's why we rushed this. Nope. Not a thing, Ben replied. Well, Blake said, musing. Well, no harm done. What difference does it make if we did it now or a month from now? I don't know, Ben said. Blake smiled. Of course you don't. So, let's get on with the story, okay? William sees that his billy goat is fine, so he drinks the water too. Later, he puts the goat back in its pen and goes inside. The next morning, he comes out, and the goat's lying on the ground. He thinks it's dead, but when he gets closer, he sees that it's different. Smaller. He thinks somebody swapped his billy goat for a nanny goat, which he didn't mind because he could get goat's milk from it. But he was pissed off that they did that and left a dead goat in his pen. He got pretty riled up. Sure, Ben said. So he grabs his gun, heads off through the woods, and runs into Marty and Chelsea, out checking their little pot garden. He shoots their knapsack, scares the hell out of them, and marches them back to his shack. William told you this? Or just Marty and Chelsea? Ben asked. Well, look at you. Getting your brain back, aren't you? Blake said. No, Marty and Chelsea told me, but William confirmed it. See, when they got back to William's shack, the goat was standing up, not dead at all. But it wasn't Billy anymore. Of course, Marty and Chelsea didn't know what had happened, and they eventually convinced William. He made them show him where their vehicle was, even checked inside and looked for goat hairs before he believed them. So, Marty and Chelsea came back and told me their story. They moved to Colton to find a secluded spot to grow pot, and we became friends. I was a little younger, but I was one of the few people in town near their age. We used to smoke together. We tried to figure out who swapped William's goat but never got a clue. That's when William got a second goat. Was it okay, or did the same thing happen? Same thing happened, Blake said. One day, William took it out to the little spring. The next morning, the billy goat had turned into a nanny goat. How? You said William drank the water too, and he didn't change. You're right, Blake agreed. That had us stumped for a while, until Chelsea suggested it might have to do with how goats digest food. She said goats have 4 stomachs. Or maybe the water works in combination with something else that goats eat but William doesn't. Which one was it? Ben asked. The combination. A weed that grows out there. It flowers, Blake explained. We did a lot of experiments, and that was it. So what did you do? Ben asked, fascinated. He knew he wouldn't remember every detail, but the story was too interesting to ignore. We fixed some soup and water for the sheriff, Blake said. The sheriff? He was a real pain, Blake said. Hated young people. Always trying to follow Marty and Chelsea because he knew they were growing pot somewhere. And you turned him into a goat? Blake laughed. No. We turned him into a middle-aged woman. About drove him nuts. Drove him out of Jackson County, which is exactly what we wanted. Wow, Ben said. You should bottle that. I can help set up a corporation for you. We thought about it, Blake said. Then I came up with the idea of using it in a different way. How? Blake shook his head with a smile. Maybe I should have waited to tell you this story. You're still pretty groggy. I know, Ben admitted. I've only been awake for a short time, but I'm already tired. How did you decide to use the water, though? Ben asked. Part 2 tomorrow, Blake said, grinning. I figured it out, Ben said the next day when Blake came into his room. You did? Blake responded, sounding surprised. You changed the people who came to Colton. That's why everyone's so young. Close, but not quite, Blake said. We changed a couple of hitchhikers, but they weren't enough. It doesn't change age, just sex. We wanted to take over the town, and it was cool to have more girls around, so I went to the city and brought some guys here. Everyone from 18 to 20. It worked, but then we had too many girls. Then do it to some girls, Ben suggested. We tried that too. Doesn't work that way. They just get really sore, like they've got the flu or something. Why doesn't it work? Shit, how the hell should I know? We don't even know why it works the way it does. It changes the body, but not 100%, as you can see when you pull down your panties. But 99.5% works. I guess, Ben said. It changes parts of the mind, too, the parts that have to do with gender. At least that's what it looks like. But not the whole mind, even though the mind is just a physical organ, so it should all change. We haven't figured that out yet. One of the guys thinks it has something to do with the flower, like it has a kind of gender. Anyway, it messes with you for a while, makes you kind of dumb and all, but that passes. We think it's because it's changing your brain during that time, but we don't know for sure. It doesn't seem to mess with memories or intelligence, though. Personality changes, maybe. That's very strange, Ben said. And it's not a very nice thing to do. Everybody seems pretty happy with it, Blake said. I can't say I like where the city council's headed now, but overall, we're doing fine. Just look at the place. You said you were on the council, Ben said. It's sort of gotten away from us, Blake admitted. A lot of new people got voted on. What are they doing? Not important, Blake said. How are you doing today? Okay, I think, Ben said. I'm remembering more. I have a little more strength. I'm still sore all over. I don't like being small. I sleep a lot. All good, my friend, Blake said. I do have a question, Ben said. Shoot. Why me? Blake said. Lots of reasons. You were ready to get away from the city. You're single. You have a skill we need here in Colton. Accountancy. Right, Blake said. He hesitated before adding, and then there's the city council. I don't understand. Why should you? I told you it got away from us. Yes. Well, listen to you. Getting that brain back, huh? Blake said with a grin. No, Marty and Chelsea told me, but William confirmed it. See, when they got back to William's shack, the goat was standing up, not dead at all. But it wasn't Billy anymore. Of course, Marty and Chelsea didn't know anything about it, but they eventually convinced William. He made them show him where their vehicle was, checked the inside, and even looked for goat hairs before he finally believed them. So now Marty and Chelsea come back and tell me their story. They moved to Colton because they wanted a remote place to grow pot, and we became friends. I was a little younger, but I was one of the few people in town around their age. We used to smoke together. We tried to find out who switched William's goat but never got a clue. That's when William got a second goat. Was it okay, or did the same thing happen? Same thing happened, Blake said. One day, William took it to the little spring. The next morning, the billy goat had turned into a nanny goat. How? You said William drank the water too, and he didn't change. You're right, Blake said. That had us stumped for a while, until Chelsea suggested it had something to do with how goats digest food. She said goats have 4 stomachs. Or maybe the water works with something else that goats eat but William doesn't. Which one was it? Ben asked. The combination. A weed that grows out there. It flowers, Blake explained. We did a lot of experiments, and that was it. So what did you do? Ben asked, interested. He knew he wouldn't remember all the details, but the story was too intriguing not to ask more. We fixed some soup and water for the sheriff, Blake said. The sheriff? He was a real pain, Blake said. Hated young people. Always trying to follow Marty and Chelsea because he knew they were growing pot somewhere. And you turned him into a goat? Blake laughed. No. We turned him into a middle-aged woman. About drove him nuts. Drove him out of Jackson County, which is exactly what we wanted. Wow, Ben said. You should bottle that. I can help set up a corporation for you. We thought about it, Blake said. Then I came up with the idea of using it in a different way. How? Blake smiled, shaking his head. Maybe I should have waited to tell you this story. You're still pretty groggy. I know, Ben admitted. I've only been awake for a short time, but I'm already tired. How did you decide to use the water, though? Ben asked. Part 2 tomorrow, Blake said with a grin. I figured it out, Ben said the next day when Blake came into his room. You did? Blake responded, surprised. You changed people who came to Colton. That's why everyone's so young. Close, but not quite, Blake said. We changed a couple of hitchhikers, but they weren't enough. It doesn't change age. We wanted to take over the town, and it was cool to have more girls around. So I went to the city and brought some guys here. All of them 18 to 20. It worked, but then we had too many girls. Then do it to some girls, Ben suggested. We tried that too. Doesn't work that way. They just get really sore, like they have the flu or something. Why doesn't it work? Shit, how the hell should I know? We don't even know why it works the way it does. It changes the body, but not 100%, as you can see when you pull down your panties. But 99.5% works. I guess, Ben said. It changes parts of the mind, too, the parts that have to do with gender. At least that's what it looks like. But not the whole mind, even though the mind is just a physical organ, so it should all change. We haven't figured that out yet. One of the guys thinks it has something to do with the flower, like it has a kind of gender. Anyway, it messes with you for a while, makes you dumb and all, but that passes. We think it's because it's changing your brain during that time, but we don't know for sure. It doesn't seem to mess with memories or intelligence, though. Personality changes, maybe. That's very strange, Ben said. And it's not a very nice thing to do. Everybody seems pretty happy with it, Blake said. I can't say I like where the city council's going now, but overall, we're doing fine. Just look at the place. You said you were on the council, Ben said. It's sort of gotten away from us, Blake admitted. A lot of new people got voted on. What are they doing? Not important, Blake said. How are you doing today? Okay, I think, Ben said. I'm remembering more. I have a little more strength. I'm still sore all over. I don't like being small. I sleep a lot. All good, my friend, Blake said. I do have a question, Ben said. Shoot. Why me? Blake said. Lots of reasons. You were ready to get away from the city. You're single. You have a skill we need here in Colton. Accountancy. Right, Blake said. He hesitated before adding, and then there's the city council. I don't understand. Why should you? I told you it got away from us. Yes. The only part of Hannah's new life that caused her any real unease was the idea of relationships. Even worse was the realization that the town's population was a bit imbalanced, with more girls than guys. She would have to compete, but she didn't even know how to approach a relationship from a girl's perspective. Lily offered advice and shared examples, but Hannah felt the topic was one of those you had to be there situations. During her 6th week in town, Hannah reopened her office. Someone had kept it clean, and it looked just like it did the day she had that special meal with the special water. Thinking about that made her think of William. What would he say if she showed up at his shack? Blake had mentioned that William seemed to have figured out what they were doing with the flowers and spring water, though no one ever said anything directly. The guys who bottled the water and picked the flowers had told William a story about an experiment at school, but they didn't think he'd believed them, given what had happened to his goat. Mostly, William just shook his head and left them alone, and they left him alone. Hannah's car battery had died, but she got it jumped so she could run errands and go to the office. Both Lily and Blake thought she was ready to move back into her apartment, so she did. She had dinner with them every night and went to a club one evening. A couple of guys asked her to dance, but she passed. Colton was set up for situations like hers, and her bank account had already been switched to her new name. She found it amusing that she had to sign a new account card because her signature had changed. On the second day in her office, the 20-year-old mayor stopped by to welcome her back. The next morning, the guy who owned the local computer store came by, and she arranged to do his bookkeeping, as well as for his wife. He was 19. In the afternoon, the girl who ran the auto repair shop stopped by. After some girl talk, they went for coffee, and Hannah added a second business to her portfolio. On the third morning, a guy who owned what he called a landscaping business but was really more of a lawn mowing service talked to her about setting up his books. His business was growing, and he'd been operating on saved receipts. The wife of a man who worked at the local bank was selling her homemade pottery on the side. She was gaining a following and thought it was time to make her business official. Hannah added another client. All of her clients were within walking distance, although the landscaping company garage was a bit of a walk. She spent a lot of time in their offices, gathering unorganized data and copying the few computer files they had. During a Friday lunch at the natural food store in the town square, Hannah thought about William again. She'd been so busy, day and night, that he hadn't crossed her mind. On a whim, she decided to visit him. It was only on the way there that she realized not only wouldn't he recognize her, but he was armed and apparently not afraid to use his weapons. She stopped at the convenience store and picked up a bag of flour, salt, and sugar. The same old man was at the counter, but he gave her a look of impatience, so she didn't bother talking to him. Outside, an elderly woman was filling her pickup with gas. When their eyes met, the woman glared at Hannah, curled her lip in anger, and turned back to the gas pump. Hannah honked her horn all the way down the road and in front of William's shack. No one responded. After a few minutes, she got out, placed the bag of groceries by the door, and knocked, not really expecting a reply. None came. She waited in her car for 30 minutes. The sky had clouded over, but the temperature was pleasant. Finally, she started the car and backed out. William appeared from behind the same bush he'd hidden behind before. He walked toward her car, his rifle held at port arms and his pistol bouncing on his hip in a loose western holster. Hannah turned off the engine and waited. "What do you want?" William asked when he got close enough to be heard. "I thought I'd come see you again," Hannah said. "I brought you another grocery bag." "Not much." "Flour, salt, and sugar." "What do you mean by again?" he asked. "Can I get out?" "No need," William said. "Start it up and move on out of here." "That's no way to treat an old friend," Hannah said. William squinted. "Don't talk in riddles to me, young lady," he said. "Spit it out." "Do you recognize the car?" "I do." "And the bag left by the door?" William's jaw worked as if he were chewing something. "Get out," he said. "Real slow." He pointed the rifle at her. Hannah got out and closed the car door behind her. "It." She started, but William quickly raised a hand to stop her, then returned it to the rifle. He stared at her, his jaw still working. He looked her up and down. Then, he looked at her face and squinted. "Gotcha, huh?" he said. "What do you mean?" Hannah asked. "My spring, my flowers," William said, pointing vaguely. "Yes," Hannah replied. "Ha." She waited, unsure of where this was going. William slowly lowered the rifle. "Want a cup of coffee? Maybe this time we won't be interrupted." He turned toward the shack. Hannah was shocked at how nonchalantly he acted. How could he see her, knowing she used to be a 6 feet 2 inches guy, and take it all in stride? William took the bag inside, set it on the floor by his chair, and sat down. He quickly got up, gestured to the beat-up couch, and said, "Ma'am." Hannah sat down, and William took his seat again. When they'd first talked, William had known more than Ben had. Now it was probably the other way around, but Hannah wasn't sure, so she let him do the talking. "You do remember me?" Hannah asked. "Of course I do," William replied. "Not looking like you do now, but I remember you. You know you're the only one who ever brought me anything?" "I'm surprised," Hannah said. "Shouldn't be," William said. "The kids in town just want the water and the flowers. An old fuddy-duddy like me just gets in their way." "You know what they use the water and flowers for?" Hannah asked. "You," he said, waving his hand in her direction. "That's right." "How long have you known?" "They figured since I was old, I was dumb," William said. "But it was obvious to me. The boys would get all giddy, gathering up the flowers and water. I watched from the trees. I knew what it had done to Billy, changed him into a nanny goat. 2 plus 2. You didn't object?" "None of my business," William said. "Can't say I like them coming around here, but it's only in the spring when the flowers bloom, so it ain't too bad." "But you were still only guessing," Hannah said. 2 plus 2, William repeated. "Want that coffee?" "I've got powdered cream and sugar. A nice fellow keeps bringing me bags of sugar." Hannah smiled. "Thank you." William got up, walked to the area he used as a kitchen, and filled an old-fashioned tin coffee pot with water. "I sneak into town every now and then," he said. "Just to keep tabs on things. At night. Nobody ever sees me. But I've seen all those new gals, and I knew where they came from." 2 plus 2. He knelt by a small fireplace and crumpled some kindling. Realizing that William was starting a fire to heat the water, Hannah said, "Don't go to all that trouble. We can forget the coffee." "Not enough time, eh?" William said with a grin. "Now me, I'm an old fella and I've got all the time in the world. I make coffee like this every day. You're a young lady, but you don't have the time. Kinda ironic, ain't it?" Hannah smiled. "It is," she agreed. William lit the fire and placed the pot on top. "Mind if I ask you something personal?" William said. "None of my business, so you just say so. No offense taken, and none intended. You've been nice to me, the only one, and I don't want to step on your toes." "Well, I won't know until I hear it, but agreed, no offense taken," Hannah said. "Okay," William said. "Do you mind?" It took Hannah a second to realize that that was the question. "Do I mind being a girl?" William nodded. "No. I like it. I prefer it, really," she said. "If I had a choice, I wouldn't go back. I'm not crazy about always having to think about how I look to other people, not being able to just be a bum on the weekend, but I like the way I move, lighter, more graceful. I really like the clothes, especially the silky and lacy stuff. It's what I am. I like pretty much everything about it. It's better. More fun. I didn't realize how bland my life was before." She paused. "What I don't like is that nobody asked me." William nodded, his face understanding. "They tricked you?" "Yeah. I'm glad they did, because I know I would have said no. How can you compare two things if you only know one? So I'm glad they did it. The only way they could do it was by tricking me, but I don't like not being asked." "I understand," William said. The water began to boil, and William stood to make them coffee. He served it in mismatched cups, with spoons that matched. They talked about William's life, though Hannah noticed he avoided mentioning anything about his life before he'd come to Colton. They talked about Hannah's life, and she was surprised to find herself doing the same thing. Her life before Colton had been so conventional and dull, so she focused on the new experiences she was having since moving to the small town. When Hannah left, William walked her to her car, and she promised to visit him again. "Not asking, understand?" he said. "I can pay, and I can pay you the gas money." "Don't worry about it," she said. "I'm fine financially." "What do you need?" William nodded. "Well, if you're stopping at that store again, they carry kitchen matches, wooden matches. You probably don't remember them, but they come in handy out here." "I know what they are," she said. "I'll bring some when I come next time." A sadness crossed his face. "You're a good person," he said, pulling a crumpled $10 bill from his pocket. He handed it to her and turned to go back inside. Chris Legrand was Hannah's first date, set up by Lily and introduced at the folk bar. Hannah had practiced dancing, following was trickier than leading, and though she didn't have much of an impulse to lead, she did okay. She messed up a few times, though, since she was still learning the signals for various moves. The foursome stopped for a drink at the rock club but left early because the music was too loud and the dancing was too frantic. Lily served snacks and drinks at their apartment, and after chatting for a while, she and Blake decided to call it a night, telling Hannah and Chris they could let themselves out. Hannah and Chris tried to talk, but it was more like whispering, and quickly gave up. In the silence of the apartment, having a private conversation felt impossible. So, they started making out. It was fun, and it got even better when Chris started getting more physical. Her pointers stiffened, and she allowed him to take off her blouse and bra. When he caressed her bare chests, she felt a rush of excitement. Chris took her hand and placed it on his inner thigh. She moved her hand back to her lap. "What's wrong?" he whispered. "It's a little fast for me," she whispered back. His eyebrows raised. "Oh," he said quietly. She kissed him again. He hesitated at first, but then kissed her back, and they continued making out, his hands sliding over her chests. "You didn't do it?" Lily asked the next day while they were washing and cutting fresh vegetables that had been dropped off by the co-op. "Lily, I thought you'd want to find out how it felt." "I do," Hannah said. "But not so fast." "Golly. I was a little nervous, too," Lily admitted. "And you're right, it's probably not a good idea to do it with the first guy you date." "On the first date," Hannah added. "That too," Lily agreed. "With a lot of the girls, though, they still have that guy thing inside them that says go for it if the opportunity presents itself." "I did feel some of that," Hannah confessed. "I was a little conflicted." "I'll bet." They both laughed. "Are you going to see him again?" Lily asked. "Maybe." He asked, and I told him to call. "Playing hard to get?" "No," Hannah said. Well, I hope you won't be offended, and I really appreciate you setting me up and everything." "But you didn't like him," Lily said. "No. I did," Hannah replied quickly. "It's just, with my first guy and all, I kind of want to pick him out myself." "You understand?" "Of course I do," Lily exclaimed. "I should have thought of that." "Sorry." Hannah reached for her hand. "Oh, it's not your fault. I know what you did for me, and I'm really grateful. It's just the feeling I have." "Do you have anyone in mind?" Hannah smiled. "Well, there is this really cute guy. He came in when I first opened my office. Blake brought him in with someone else. I thought we sort of established a rapport. As much as you can in 10 minutes, anyway." "Do you remember his name?" Hannah grinned. "Of course. Josh Holiday." "Oh, I know Josh. He's cute, isn't he? Do you want me to call him for you?" "Could you? I mean, don't say anything about, you know." "I won't." He might not be the one I want, Hannah said, but he sure is good looking. You'll love him, Lily said. He's very laid back, but he knows how to party. He's a good dancer, too. Hannah groaned. I've got a long way to go in that department. You did fine, Hannah. I'll get used to it, Hannah said. I know, Lily said. Hannah finished washing the celery, wrapped it carefully, and placed it in the crisper. Something on your mind, hon? Lily asked. Yeah, kinda, Hannah said. Can I ask you a really personal question? That's what I'm here for, Lily said. I volunteered along with Blake to help you through the first months. And I'd like to think I'm your friend, too. You are, Hannah said. I couldn't ask anyone else. What is it? Are you happy? Sure, Lily said. Can't you tell? I mean, are you happy as a girl? Totally, Lily said. You're not? I am, Hannah said. I can't imagine being a guy. I can't even imagine why anyone would want to be a guy. But it's still new and exciting to me. You've been a girl longer. Almost 3 years, Lily said. And I'll tell you, if someone announced a party in the square tomorrow where I could change back, I'd run so fast and so far they'd never find me. She exaggerated her fright, and they both laughed. I'm joking, she said, but I'm serious, too. Hannah nodded. And not having kids? Hannah asked. That's the only thing I don't like, Lily said. But the way I think of it, a guy can't have kids. Not really. So that's just a special thing that the water and the flowers don't give you. Along with you know what? I know what, Hannah said with a smile. Down there. That's disappointing. Yes, it is. And intimacy is done. That's right, Lily said. It feels a little weird at first, but after a while, you start to think of it like regular fun. Hannah nodded. I've been thinking about that, and I thought of asking you if you knew a guy who wasn't, big? Yeah. Well, it's not like I know how all the guys in town are hung, Lily said, but I did date this one guy who was pretty small down there. Is he nice? The best, Lily replied. Nice looking, but only moderately intelligent. He dropped out in his freshman year, and I think it was because he realized classes were only going to get harder. I don't want to give the wrong impression, he's not dumb or anything. Just an average guy. Hannah nodded. Sound good? Lily asked. What's his name? Kyle Wagoner. I can introduce you. That might be good, Hannah said. The bookkeeping business was going great. Hannah's social life was thriving. She was fit, happy, and busy. Keeping accounts didn't feel like the drudgery it had in the city because she personally knew the people she worked with, and they had a lot in common. The laid-back atmosphere in Colton made even the most mundane parts of life pleasant. Colton turned out to be a lot busier than it seemed at first glance. She discovered a whole network of clubs and organizations, most of them informal, and learned origami, square dancing, and oil painting. While Lily, Blake, and Hannah remained close friends, Hannah's social circle grew to include a few girlfriends and a short list of guys. Lily had introduced her to Kyle, who had been attractive and fun, and one night, she gave him her virginity. They dated for a while, but the relationship eventually fizzled out, and she began seeing a guy who managed the grocery store across the square. 2 months into that relationship, Lily got sick. It started with a mild stomach ache. The next day, it was gone, but it returned 2 days later, more intense. Lily saw the town doctor, Susan Jacobs, who had been Mark Jacobs before transitioning and moving to Colton. Susan couldn't find anything wrong. Over the next few days, the pains worsened, then disappeared abruptly. A month later, another girl had the same problem, and a few weeks later, a third girl reported cramps. Jacobs compared diets, lifestyles, and medical histories, sending out blood tests. The tests were controversial because no one knew what they might reveal. There was a chance that Colton's secret could come to light. Jacobs ran as many tests as she could, telling everyone she didn't think the blood tests would raise any questions. They didn't, but they also didn't reveal the cause. When a fourth girl fell ill, Hannah decided to visit William. While there was no reason to think he would know anything, it was his water and his flowers, and she felt the need to speak to someone outside of Colton. He was pleased to see her, and his gruff attitude seemed to have disappeared. She allowed him to go through the familiar process of starting a fire and heating water for coffee while they made small talk. Finally, when they were sitting with their full cups of hot coffee, he asked, "You ready to tell me what you came to tell me?" Hannah smiled. "I guess I've been rambling on about nothing." "No harm in that," he said. "It's just not like you." Hannah nodded. "I do have something I want to talk to you about." He sipped his coffee and waited. "Some of the girls are getting sick," she said. "Stomach aches," William said. "Yes." "How did you know?" "Is that all?" he asked. "They're getting worse," she said. "And it seems to be spreading." William took another sip of his coffee. Hannah started. "Well, the main thing about all the girls is that they used to be guys before they drank the water from the spring and ate the flowers. You want to know if that's connected to the stomach aches?" She nodded. He took another sip. "I don't know how I expect you to know that," she admitted, "but I felt like I needed to talk to someone." "They got a doctor in town?" he asked. "Yes." "What does she say?" "She doesn't know what's causing it. She sent out blood tests, but the first 2 came back normal. 2 more are due to come back this week." He nodded. "Do you think it's the water and flowers?" Hannah asked. "You do," he said. "I can't think of what else it could be," she said. "None of the guys have gotten sick, and the doctor said none of the girls ate the same things, so it couldn't be food poisoning or anything like that. It's just so." He waited, but she didn't finish. "Contagious?" he asked. "No," she replied. 2 of them are close friends, but the others didn't really hang out with them much. One of the girls is a lesbian, and her girlfriend is fine." "A lesbian?" "Well, don't that beat all," he said. "They got the water and flowers?" "Yes. Used to be guys and now they're lesbians," he said, as if amused. "Never thought of that. But like I said, her girlfriend isn't sick, and they live together, so it's not contagious." "Seems not," he said. "It has to be the water and flowers," she said. "Lots of possibilities with illnesses," he said. "You don't think it's what it is?" "How long you been a girl?" he asked. She was surprised by the change of subject. 10 months, maybe 11. The first few weeks, I was kind of out of it, so I'm not exactly sure." "Why?" "Did I ever show you my garden? Bought the fence because the deer kept eating everything I grew, even before it was ready for picking," William explained. "Birds and rabbits too. There aren't many predators around, so they breed pretty fast." Hannah had seen the garden before, but now she couldn't help wondering where William had gotten the money for such an enclosure. The same question applied to the goat pen. Neither was overly expensive, but neither looked homemade either. Unlike his shack, they were made of metal and were manufactured. He'd even added a 6-foot-wide strip of chain link fence around the upright fence, knowing that deer wouldn't walk over it for fear of getting tangled. Once she thought about it, Hannah realized that metal items like hinges, nails, a hammer, and even guns and bullets had to come from stores, just like the enclosures. Organic vegetables may not need fertilizer or insecticide, but where had he gotten the money for seeds, shovels, and all the other supplies? She brought him coffee, salt, and sugar, but how had he managed to get those before she arrived? All of these things had to be paid for with real money. As she walked through the vegetable garden, William led her toward the goat pen. The two goats glanced at them before turning away. Never did get to meet Billy, did you? William asked. I saw him once when I came out. I walked back here to see if you were around. And how had he paid for the goats? Did he come to Colton with everything he needed, maybe a little saved up cash? From doing what? How had he gotten all of it here? Yep, he said. Oh well, Billy, who became a nanny goat. Right, Hannah said. When did you get the other one? A couple of months after that, he answered. They stood there, watching the goats. After a minute, Hannah turned toward the shack, but William kept staring at the goats. Do you have any ideas about the stomach problems? Hannah asked. If it's the water and flowers, do you think they might need to take more? That's what everybody will think, William said. But you don't think that's it? Hannah asked. Didn't say that, he said. He turned to face her, and she noticed the sadness returning to his face. There was a long silence before he finally turned and started heading back to the shack. Inside, he offered her another cup of coffee, and she accepted. He poured it slowly, stirring carefully before handing it to her and sitting back down. You remember one time you asked if you could ask me something personal, no offense, she said. Yes, Ma'am, he said. Can I ask you something, no offense meant, and you can tell me it's none of my business if you want and no offense taken, she asked. Only fair, he replied. Some of the things you have, the seeds, the goats, the fences, the guns and bullets, are store-bought. They have to be paid for with cash. And where do I get it? You don't have to answer, she said. I'm not someone who pries. You answered my question, so I'll answer yours. I just ask that you keep a confidence, he said. Of course. He nodded and settled back in his chair. Every 6 months, some boys from the city come and bring me things, and I give them a list for the next time, he explained. I don't need much, don't want much, but there are a few things that make life more tolerable. He didn't elaborate, so she asked, who are they? Hirelings, he replied. I own a couple buildings on the square, and they handle the rent and things like that. I also own most of this forest and the land we're on now. Not bragging, you understand. It was left to me by my mom and dad. Those boys take care of the taxes and all that stuff. You own this land? Hannah asked, astonished. And the forest? And buildings in Colton? Not the whole forest, he said. I didn't mean to sound too full of myself, but I own a pretty substantial chunk of it, yes. And you inherited it? That I did. Wow. He smiled. Wow, he agreed. When I was a boy, I lived in the city, but as soon as I got old enough, I moved out and lived on the farm. My folks stayed in the city. When they passed, I left and wandered around for a few years, trying to figure out life. I went to Canada, Hawaii, Mexico. Got married, but that didn't work out too well. Eventually, I decided to move here. Because you inherited the land and the buildings, she said, filling in the blanks. In a way, he said, seeming to want to leave it at that. By sipping his coffee, he seemed to signal the end of the conversation on that subject. You didn't know about the water and the flowers? Hannah asked. I've been here over 25 years, William said, and I told you how I discovered it. Or, to give credit where it's due, how Billy discovered it. Hannah tried to process this new information. A hermit, but a wealthy one. He wasn't a squatter, he was a big landowner. He owned buildings in Colton. I can see I didn't satisfy you with my answer, he said. You did, Hannah said. It's your business, your life. It's none of my business. It just takes a minute to change gears a little. Aha, he said. I guess I'd better get going, Hannah finally said, standing up. Thanks for the coffee. William walked her to the door. I don't believe we've ever really introduced ourselves, and since we're friends, maybe we should, he said at the door. We didn't exactly start off very formally, Hannah replied with a smile. Nope. I apologize for waving the gun at you. I should have said that sooner. No offense, she said. I still owed you that apology, he said, extending his hand. Name's William. She grinned and shook his hand. Hannah. Got a last name, Hannah? He asked. Clark, she replied. Hannah Clark. Still holding her hand, he added, Colton, Hannah. William Colton. As Hannah drove back through the scrubland and forest, she thought about William Colton and what all the new information meant. While it didn't seem to directly affect her life, or the lives of those around her, it was still fascinating to learn about who William truly was. His great-or-not-so-great granddaddy, as William described him, had founded the small town many years ago, and nearly all the land in the county had once belonged to the family. Over time, they sold off sections to fund the building of the town itself. The family had eventually realized that there was nothing particularly attractive about Colton, a lack of river, lake, scenic mountain, or major crossroads. Later, with no interstate road passing through, the land was only suitable for basic crops, not particularly fertile. So, they turned management over to real estate agents and moved back to their original home in the city. Hannah pieced the history together from William's account, but it wasn't until she was almost at the turn onto the main road that she realized what else William had told her. She was so shocked by the revelation that she had to pull over and sat there, trembling for a while. It took her 15 minutes before she felt steady enough to turn around and head back to the shack. William was waiting for her in front of his home. She stepped out of the car, legs unsteady, and walked toward him. The sad expression was back on his face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Is it true? She asked, her voice shaky as she feared the answer. He nodded. Hannah took a deep breath. You should sit down, he said, gently taking her arm and leading her inside. She collapsed on the old couch, half doubled over. That's Billy in the pen, isn't it? She asked. Yes, he replied softly. Hannah nodded to herself. He changed back, she said. He didn't respond. He drank the water, ate the flowers, and changed into a girl goat. Now he's changed back into a boy goat, she said. Yes. And you didn't do anything to make that happen. It wasn't a question because she knew it was true. I'm sorry, William said. She gave him a weak smile. So, all the girls are going to change back. That's what the stomach aches mean. He shrugged helplessly. How long do I have? I don't know, he said. Billy changed into a nanny goat a little over 3 years ago. I don't know how it works with people. Did you give him more water and flowers? She asked. I took Billy for walks every spring and summer, let him drink and eat when he was still a nanny. Nannies get a little rambunctious every 3 weeks, they go into heat for a few hours, wagging their tails and bleeding. A walk does em good. But he still changed back, she said, a tear slipping down her cheek. Dried flowers might have messed it up, he said. I gave him those once when he was a nanny. Maybe they need to be fresh. William was holding on to hope, but they both knew it didn't mean much. The boys in town had probably used dried flowers since they changed men into women year-round. I don't want to be a guy, Hannah said earnestly. She wiped away a tear and forced a smile. Well, at least I have 2 years left. If there was anything I could do. His voice trailed off. I know, Hannah said quietly. Thank you. He watched as she composed herself. I need to tell the others, Hannah said. It doesn't make sense, Lily said. I know 4 girls who've been girls longer than I have, and they're not sick. Maybe it doesn't work the same for everyone, Hannah said. Lily started to speak, but no words came out. Her lower lip trembled. Oh, Lily, Hannah said, pulling her close. Lily sobbed and said, I just wanted to be a complete girl. I know, Hannah whispered. I know. I thought the longer I was a girl, the more girl I'd become, that I'd finish changing, down there, too, Lily said, her voice choked with emotion. Now it's all going away. Maybe not, Hannah said. We'll find something. Lily's tears flooded down her cheeks. There was something strange about the girls who were getting sick. Lily was right, it didn't make sense that some were affected and others weren't. Hannah and Lily decided to keep the information about Billy the goat as quiet as possible, telling only the girls with the most severe symptoms. Some had reached the point where the pain was debilitating, and they were spending hours in bed each day. For Lily and the other girl who had experienced stomach pains first, the discomfort had begun spreading to their chests and legs. Hannah worked tirelessly, creating a chart to find a pattern. Her accountant's mind sought order in the chaos. The chart began with the dates the girls had undergone their transformations and listed others who had become girls either before or shortly after, but who showed no signs of illness. For days, she interviewed the sick girls, gathering as much personal history and information about their habits as she could. What she was looking for was a common factor they all shared that wasn't present in the healthy girls. A shame they have to go through this, William remarked. He sat in his chair, and Hannah sat across from him, her usual spot on the couch. I guess they wanted it too much, Hannah replied. I can understand that, William said. So can I, she said. Natural thing for a girl to want to be a girl all over, he continued. Most of them, anyway. Not sure about these modern girls. Well, these girls did, Hannah said. That's why they kept sneaking out here, getting more water and flowers. They hoped it would complete their transformation. Wanted female plumbing, he said. Yes. And what it did was work the other way instead, she said. Overdosed, I suppose you could call it. With the best of intentions, she added. Girls who didn't take extra doses are okay, he asked. We're all fine, she said. Those other girls are going to turn back into guys, Hannah nodded. William sipped his coffee. Couldn't be happy with the way they were. Everybody always wants more. That's what I got away from everybody always wanting more. She smiled gently. You had the right idea. That, and everybody being in such a damn hurry, he said. I think the bottom line of why I moved to Colton in the first place was to get away from all of that, Hannah said. Some people bring it with them, William said. Don't be too hard on them, she said. It's a natural instinct. But now they're not even going to be girls anymore. I wonder if Billy would have kept drinking from the spring and eating the flowers if I hadn't led him back there a few times, William mused. You think his instinct, when he was a nanny goat, would have been to drink more and eat more? Hard to say, Hannah replied. I don't know how goats think. She smiled at him, but he didn't smile back. I stopped doing it when he started changing back, William said. You mean you didn't take him to the spring anymore? Nope. Rather have a Billy than a nanny, so I let it happen. He couldn't have understood what was happening, Hannah said. It must have terrified him. Oh, I'm sure it did, William replied. You want to go out and say hello to him? He stood up as he said it, and though Hannah wanted to refuse, she politely stood with him. They took their coffee cups with them to the pen. The two goats looked in their direction and then turned away, just as they had before. Say hello, William said. Hannah walked up to the gate of the pen. She looked at the goats, her brow furrowed. Probably more confused than ever, but he doesn't show it, William said. I don't. Hannah started to say. Well, best as I can figure it, William said. The water and the flowers turned him into a nanny. Then too much water and flowers turned the nanny back into Billy. Hannah stared at the two almost identical nanny goats. I kept him from the water and flowers, William said. Until you told me your story about the stomach aches. Billy probably had the same aches when he turned back from a nanny into a Billy. So I figured there was nothing to lose if I tried the old combo on him again. And he's a nanny? Hannah asked. Don't that beat all? William said. Course that's what it always did, turned Billy goats into nanny goats. Did it once, can do it twice. Oh my God, Hannah whispered. Yep. So Lily and the other girls who are turning back into guys can be turned into girls again, she said, almost as a statement, though doubt still lingered in her voice. Don't see why not, he said. One thing will be different, though. What? She asked, worried that there was something else she hadn't considered. No trick this time, he said. They'll get to decide. They will, won't they? Hannah said, her voice lifting with hope. Figure they'll do it? He asked. She grinned. Oh, you bet they will. Thanks for watching. If you liked this story, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Also, consider becoming a member for exclusive stories and early access.